Hi once again, everyone. It's Eric Wilhelm here. It is time for Weather Geeks. We're going to really geek out tonight and do something a little bit different. I actually did kind of a mini version of Weather for Weather Geeks on the news this evening, something I don't do very often, but I did want to take a couple of minutes and maybe answer some questions about why it's been so warm lately and what's the deal with the weather this year. It's been kind of weird, and is this climate change, and those sorts of topics are of interest to a lot of people, so I devoted a couple of minutes to talking about that on TV this evening, and I'm going to expand upon that a little in this video for you on this Wednesday evening. Now, it's of course no secret, 2017 has been a very warm year compared to the average across our part of the country. We've only had 3 cooler than average months, and they've only been a little cooler than average. 0.1 degrees in March and May, and almost a degree in August. Every other month has been warmer than average, and some by a big margin. January, February, April, all very warm. September was warm, and then this month is off to a ridiculously warm start. Through the first 11 days of the month, we're over 10 degrees warmer than the average. So this continues a trend that actually started in late 2015, and we've had lots and lots of warmer than average months in the last, say, 2 years, including, of course, in 2016. All right, so why is this going on? First, we can point to a couple of reasons, especially in the fall part of this, in the last couple of months. The pattern has been generally kind of stuck. We've had a big dominant upper ridge across parts of the northern Rockies, the Plains states, and parts of the upper Midwest. This effectively blocks any cold air masses trying to come south out of Canada. And if one does sneak down, it doesn't have staying power. The pattern can't stay locked in on cold. It's just staying locked in on warmth. And one of the reasons why it's been kind of stuck like this is, reason number 2, is the active tropical season. We had a lot of tropical systems, including some strong hurricanes in the Caribbean, the southwestern Atlantic. And when that happens, that tends to put a screeching halt to the weather pattern across the lower 48 states. These tropical systems act to kind of not only kind of strengthen the ridge across the eastern half of the U.S., but keep that ridge locked in place. The things can't keep progressing across the country and out to sea when you've got strong tropical systems blocking their way down across the Atlantic and in the Caribbean. So that's another reason why the last couple of months have been so warm and also very, very dry. We've been running rainfall deficits since July, although I will say for the first 11 days of October, we're actually running a little above average now with the help of some recent rains. But the pattern has really flipped since July because the first half of the year was actually pretty wet. And for the year so far, you can see this number up at the top here, we're actually still running a surplus for the year. It's hard to believe considering how dry it's been, but because it was so wet compared to the average for most of January through June, with the exception of April, we're still actually running a surplus for the year. So this actually is important when it comes to talking about temperatures. There's a feedback loop that can occur here. When you have a dry surface, dry soil, the sun's energy doesn't have to devote as much of its energy to evaporating things when there's not much to evaporate during close to the ground. So when the soil's dry, when the vegetation's dry, not as much evaporation occurs, which means that more of that energy can be devoted towards heating up the ground and therefore heating up the air. The sun does not actually heat the air. The ground heats the air. The sun heats the ground, and then the ground heats the air. And that is a much more efficient process when you have a dry surface. And as we've gotten drier and drier over the last few months, that's probably helped us to get warmer and warmer. Well, the elephant in the room, if you will, we've got to talk about climate change. And here's my overall stance on climate change. I get this question occasionally. What's my stance on climate change? This, unfortunately, has become a very political issue. It's very unfortunate because there's nothing political about it. It's science. The climate is changing across the U.S. and across the world, especially in the Arctic regions. Now, the question is, A, how much of that is man's influence and how much of it is natural? And I am not sure of the answer to that, and I don't think a lot of people are. But the climate is changing, and another question is this climate change causing weather extremes across the U.S. and other parts of the world? It's hard to really attribute individual weather events or even short-term changes or or trends, I should say. It's hard to really pin those on climate change, but we can say that climate change can tilt the odds in favor of extreme weather or unusual weather. And this is the analogy that I use. If you're a baseball fan, you remember back in the late 90s, a lot of home runs, especially by Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. Turns out they were using steroids. Now, every single home run that Sammy Sosa hit was not because he was using steroids, but because he was using steroids, that increased the odds that he would hit a home run on any given pitch. So it's also, if you think of dice, if you manage to manipulate the dice somehow and make one side a little heavier than another, you increase the odds of certain things being rolled with those dice. And so a change in climate is kind of like having the atmosphere on steroids, in that it really increases the odds that unusual things can happen, kind of like the weather that we've had in recent months and over the last couple years. So that's kind of where I stand on that, and hopefully that answers some questions that some people, whether they are weather savvy like you are, or maybe not so much. A lot of people do have questions about this stuff, and hopefully that helped a little bit. It's a complicated topic, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's a controversial topic, but I'll do my best to try to explain it the best I can. All right, as far as our actual weather, when I recorded Weather Geeks at 7:15 this evening, we had a couple of showers, even a couple of downpours slowly moving through parts of Columbian and Mahoning counties. Up in Cleveland for the decisive Game 5 this evening, they're going to play ball. Now, could there be a touch of drizzle or a sprinkle? Yeah, but nothing that's going to cause any sort of a delay. And speaking of drizzle and sprinkles, that's going to be a possibility here again tonight and into at least the first half of your Thursday. I have the highest rain odds before lunchtime on Thursday. It's not going to be much. Touches of drizzle, occasional shower or a sprinkle, something like that. Kind of more of a nuisance than anything. That's the way Thursday morning's going to go. Thursday afternoon, I suspect we're largely dry, and I suspect we're largely dry on Friday as well, although it's still going to be pretty cloudy. We might get into some drying in the lower levels of the atmosphere, allowing for a little clearing Friday afternoon. An optimistic forecast would suggest that. A pessimistic forecast would be it's still pretty cloudy on Friday. Then, here comes the warmth for the weekend. We've been talking about this all week. We're going to get firmly into the warm sector again as we kick off the weekend, and that means temperatures will soar into the upper 70s to around 80 degrees on Saturday. Now, Sunday's forecast has been tricky because the models have been struggling with the timing of this strong cold front that's heading our way. There's been a little bit, yesterday the models slowed down the front. Today they're speeding it up a little bit again. And so what I've done with the forecast is thrown in a decent odds of seeing showers and perhaps even a rumble of thunder before sunset Sunday evening. This is Sunday afternoon, and here's Sunday evening. I think in a lot of places it's going to rain some just before sunset Sunday evening, but the majority of the daylight hours should be fine. It's going to rain for a handful of hours, and then it's going to feel like fall early next week with a couple of dry days coming up for Tuesday and into Wednesday. Check out the temperature trend. Now, what I do think about this is that these numbers late next week and into next weekend are too conservative. I think we're going to get well up into the 70s again, maybe even flirting with 80 on October 20th through the 22nd, somewhere in that time frame. I mean, that's getting late in the year to have that kind of warmth, but the modeling is pretty impressive. All right, I know this video's getting kind of long already, but let's talk a little bit more about the winter forecast, which I'll have out around Halloween. Last evening, go back and watch it if you haven't yet. I gave some hints on things I'm looking at for the winter forecast in terms of temperatures. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about snow and precipitation. The premise this year for winter is that we will be in a weak La Nina setup. And here's all the years since 1950 featuring a weak La Nina. La Nina, of course, the cooling of the waters in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, close to South America. That can influence weather patterns across much of the northern hemisphere. The weaker the La Nina or El Nino is, the harder it is to kind of hang your hat on its potential impacts. But anyway, when you throw all those weak La Nina years in the hopper and you see what came of them, here's a composite of all those years in terms of precipitation compared to average. A couple of things stand out here. One would be the dry conditions across parts of the mid-Atlantic states, down into the Gulf Coast region and into the Southwest, and the wetter than average conditions in the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, and the upper Midwest as well. I apologize for all my telestrations here. I finally got them to clear. So dry here, wet here is the overall trend when you look at all those La Niñas. Now, when you throw a bunch of years in the hopper and create an average like that, it can kind of mask some of the extremes because no El Nino or La Nina is alike. Some La Nina years feature a fair amount of snow here. Some feature a wimpy winter without much snow. One of the closest analogs I'll be looking at very carefully when I construct this forecast in the next few weeks is the winter of 1971 into 72. The reason for that was a weak La Nina year, but also it had a very warm autumn preceding that winter. So September and October in particular were very warm in 1971. And then the winter was a weak La Nina winter. Well, what happened that winter? You can see a couple of trends here again for the U.S. as a whole. Dry southwest, wet northwest, kind of actually wettish in parts of the deep south, and kind of a mixed signal across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, and the Ohio Valley as well. Kind of an unremarkable year in terms of precipitation for us in 1971-72. These are some of the things I'll be looking at when I construct the forecast. You look back at the past to think about the future. This is just one thing I look at. There's a lot of other things that go into a seasonal forecast, but one of the most important ingredients is looking back at past years that have similar setups. We call them analog years. And 1971 into 72 is a pretty strong analog year so far. But we're going to be looking at a lot more things over the next few weeks. Again, the winter forecast on air, online, on this video, etc., around Halloween, give or take a few days. Maybe the last couple of days of October, maybe the first couple of days of November. We'll see how busy the weather might be and how things will shake out. But it'll be on air, online in a few weeks. So look forward to that and look forward to an Indians victory tonight. And thank you for watching Weather for Weather Geeks.